Side effects may include suicidality and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, suicidality is a side effect? The fuck are you talking about?
What kind of measure of health is being sane in an insane society? We're not looking at the right questions.
What is human thriving? What is a life worth living? What is a life worth protecting? What is a world worth saving?
Psychedelics have an amazing ability to reestablish that default mode network of the brain. You have to have a symptom of something for it to be available. They don't have a symptom of not enough happiness.
These wildly transformative, transcendent experiences are trying to be measured under this other model. It's like the model has to meet the medicine for this to actually be understood.
So it's like looking at the forest instead of just the individual trees. You know, how do we optimize the forest?
Dr. Dan Stickler, how are you, my brother?
I am so thrilled to be here to get one of our conversations on tape.
I know, right? We've had so many of them, and first in so many different areas, and you've been so instrumental in my life in many ways. For what most people don't know is you were instrumental in actually Vailana and I getting together. You were right there at the beginning. You were in the airplane when I proposed to her on that flight to Sedona, and stayed with us in Sedona at the beginning of lockdown. And you've been a part of our personal journey, our romantic journey, my health journey. You know, you're going to be helping me prepare for fertility. We just gave a dap to officially, like friends do, say like...
We set a time.
We set a time frame. We're going in. My swimmers are going to be ready to swim, and we're going to be ready to go. And you have such a wide range of knowledge on, health optimization, performance optimization. Psychedelic medicine is another one of your fields of expertise, and just the general understanding of what's going on in the world as it pertains to human health and thriving of the heart, mind, and spirit. And so many areas to talk about. But I thought I would just kind of allow you to explain how you landed where you are in this particular kind of intersection of human performance optimization, thriving, psychedelic medicine, esoteric, ancient wisdom traditions. Like, how'd you get here, man?
I'm not really sure how I got here, but, I went into medicine with a preconception of what it was going to really be like. I thought it was about helping the human to be better at who they are and how they perform, and just was disenchanted by the fact that it was just for disease, essentially. It was this stepwise postponement of death is the way I put it. I mean, somebody has a problem, you intervene, you stop it at that point, and then they go until they drop again, and you stop that.
And that might even be an overestimation. A lot of times you're not stopping anything.
Right.
You're just masking the symptoms so that you can tolerate.
Giving people treatments that are going to create
new symptoms.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at what point, so you're in medical school, obviously, and you're probably still kind of bought into the system here, but at what point did you start to raise your eyebrows and go, this feels a little funny? Was it after medical school, or did you start to have early?
No, it was early in medical school. And I was just like, where's the human nutrition piece of this? I mean, we learned disease nutrition, how to treat people in kidney failure with diet and cancer patients. But that was brief, and there was not anything really on exercise and nutrition. Not much on sleep at all. I mean, all these lifestyle factors that are so important that were kind of glossed over, and we focused only on disease.
Yeah, I mean, how to breathe, how to move, how to sleep, how to fuck, how to eat, how to have a positive mindset. These are some fundamental basics, actually. And it's not only medical school that should be teaching them, it's actually school. It's one of the big criticisms I have of school.
Yeah.
Is how about we go back to the basics first before we learn the date of the Treaty of Versailles? I don't give a shit. I'll look that up on Google. It doesn't matter. But how to breathe, that's important.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. All the stuff that the kids learn in school, and you can access it, the answers to anything you want right now.
Right.
It's just amazing to have that extension of the mind with all the technology that's out there now.
Right. And for the argument, oh, well, it's good to be able to memorize things. Okay, memorize a poem. You know, like that's useful. You know what?
Yeah.
Like, you know, the Treaty of Versailles, not useful. But you know what's useful? If you can recite If by Rudyard Kipling off your own memory at just the right time when someone's going through a hard place. Like, you want to practice memorization? Great. Memorize something that is like a value add to your life.
And in those memorizing, especially when it comes to something like a poem, do you know the meaning of it?
Yes.
What's behind it? What does it tell us?
Yeah. Yeah. We're in a interesting time now where we have to start understanding and telling a new story, and telling a new story of health and human thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And you're definitely a big part of that story. And it just feels like we need to gather all of the allies together and just really make a push. And I appreciate the people who are doing this with podcasts. And, you know, I'm doing my best. A lot of people are doing their best, but it just feels like we need a kind of like aggregate a lot of energy and then just really start to push this into culture if we're going to see the significant changes that we really need.
Yeah, I mean, cultural memes are generally major attractors in a culture, and everybody seems to gravitate towards them. And we've got to reestablish or reify the cultural memes and get people to really look at the current paradigm and what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, all right. So one of these paradigms that in our brief pre-podcast conversation you were talking about is there's a change in the understanding of the paradigm that says DNA is going to control your life. Your birth DNA is going to control your life. So go in and explain to people what this revision to the old story and this new paradigm looks like, which is not birth DNA, but actually the epigenetic, pathway that you're going to follow in life. So explain to people what that means.
Yeah. So science right now is very reductionistic. It looks at parts and predicts outcome based on the combination of the parts that you're working with, as opposed to looking at the whole organism as a whole, essentially. I mean, looking at from the cellular level out to the environment, how is everything interacting in that? But we focus on specific organ systems or specific metabolic processes, and that's reductionism. Mm-hmm. The human system is a complex adaptive system, and it requires systems thinking to approach it. And this new paradigm is systems biology, and it's getting a ton of backing behind it with scientists. But there's also a lot of pushback from the old guard because, it's not invalidating the reductionism. I mean, reductionism got us a long way here. Mm. But we've reached the capacity of what it can do, and now it's time to start looking at the human life as a process and really look at it as a whole organism. It's like looking at the forest instead of just the individual trees. You know, how do we optimize the forest?
There's a piece that's in a recent book that I published through one of the divisions of my new publishing company called World Philosophy and Religion. It's First Principles and First Values, and it's by Gaffney and Stein under the pen name David J. Temple. And they talk about the difference between complicated systems and complex systems. Complicated systems are like an airplane, right? Like you have an engine, you have the controls, you have all of these things. They work together, but each individual thing, if something's broken, you just focus on that thing. If there's something wrong with the propeller, you focus on the propeller. If there's something wrong with the wing, you focus on the wing. If there's something wrong with the control wire, you focus on that. That's complicated, right? So it requires individual knowledge because it's a machine, and this machine has individual parts that do work together. Of course, the propulsion of the engines then has to go through the wings. And so they work together, but it's not like a complex system, which is like an ecosystem, a forest, or a human body, where they're all actually intermingled in such a way that if you isolate any one of those things, you're not going to get the whole picture.
Right.
You can't just fix one thing. I mean, we've seen this type of thinking when they like introduced cane toads in Australia, right? Like, all right, we're going to introduce cane toads and they're going to eat the pests and they're going to keep things off the cane. But then they destroyed the whole ecosystem that they were doing. Now they have this huge cane toad problem, but it's like they were using complicated system thinking to try and solve a complex problem, which is involving the ecosystem. And it's the same with the body. It just doesn't fundamentally work when you have a complex system. And for a complex system, you need a whole comprehensive universal story, a new story that you're able to tell about the whole.
Right. And I mean, the entire universe, I mean, everything is a complex adaptive system.
Yes.
You know, the airplane, the computer, all of those things are complicated. So it really is the sum of the parts. But life is, you can't, it's much greater than the sum of the parts is the best way to put it. And you don't want to look at the individual parts either. You want to look at how the parts interact, interrelate, interconnect. I mean, we are dependent origination. So we are dependent on everything else around us. Even just knowing ourselves, we're dependent on having someone or something to interact with in order to know who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the whole cosmos is in conversation.
I like that.
You know, and that's another thing from the first principles of first five is the discussion of everything being in a conversation. And and Jordan Peterson talks about this as well. It's like sanity, and Charles Eisenstein, sanity is a group project. Like actually this idea that we're not in conversation with the rest of the world, you know, by even how we eat and how we breathe and how we actually talk to other people, it's necessary. Like we're part of a gigantic, you know, individuation of the one, of God, of the all that is, you know, and so we need to be talking to God and all the other parts. We are already, you know.
Yeah, Daniel Schmachtenberger had a good quote recently. He said, what kind of measure of health is being sane in an insane society? And I love that. And that's all the interconnectedness of every individual.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So when it breaks down to what does this mean for somebody in a variety of different conditions, if you want to go by them, to actually shift their thinking from complicated systems thinking to actually complex systems thinking. So when you're guiding people, you know, you have a peer on, you lead people through the complexities of their goals for human health optimization and thriving. So what are some of the specific things that you start to talk about with people that differ from the current complicated systems paradigm?
Well, let's take something from the disease model, the type 2 diabetes. You know, how do we assess that? We assess that based on blood sugar levels, hemoglobin A1C, what their insulin level is. And when we get to a certain point, we'll recommend an oral hypoglycemic to lower the blood glucose, and then eventually injections of insulin to manage the glucose. Then we monitor their glucose and hemoglobin A1C. Well, getting their glucose even down into a normal range, they still get the complications of diabetes. And, you know, that doesn't jive with that reductionism. And why is that? It's because it is a complex system. You know, you want to look at all of the factors. And I don't like root cause thinking because root cause is also reductionistic. It brings it down to one cause. And there's nothing root cause in a complex system. There are shared pathways that we can focus on. But in diabetes, we know what's happening here. Their diet, their movements, their sleep patterns. These are key things that should be addressed, and they're minimally addressed, either because doctors don't have the time or the knowledge to provide that. And even if you look at like their food intake, you've got to consider things like, what is their belief system? Where do they live? Do they have access to healthier foods or not? What are their finances like? Can they afford to buy those? So you can keep asking questions and going out and out and out from all of these things that are contributing to this person now has diabetes, but we're so focused on the blood glucose and lowering the blood glucose to a marker level. And you're rewarded in the healthcare system now for performance, like getting people, getting their blood sugars under control, getting people to reduce their medications, which is great, but there's not incentive for the lifestyle factors.
Wait, so how are healthcare professionals actually rewarded for doing things like that? Because it seems like in the model there's also an inverse reward coming from pharmaceutical pressure to actually keep people on more pharmaceuticals rather than less.
Yeah, and they're looking at metrics that say, oh, your performance is better than this doc's performance.
Got it.
Because you've got their blood sugars under control. You have their blood pressure consistently in range. Mm-hmm. But what happens, I know some doctors that will not take people that have multiple conditions.
Padding their stats.
Yeah, because they know most of these people are non-compliant, and they are going to crush their statistics on that.
So that would be like, I would imagine something like a neurosurgeon, right? Like a neurosurgeon that wants a high survival rate would be wanting to take the easier cases rather than those more complicated cases.
For sure.
So that their statistics of survivability would go up so they can get more patients, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in that kind of competitive comparison metric, which is really where, the financial incentives in medicine, I think there's a beautiful aspect to the way that we have financial incentives that drive everything, because people should be rewarded, but there's always a way to gamify that in a way where you play it to your advantage. And whenever we see that availability to gamify the system to get more money, then people will play the game, even out of the self-serving bias. Even if they're not maliciously doing so, the self-serving bias will say, oh, well, no, I'm actually doing what's right, just even though it's benefiting them, but they're not actually aware that they have some greedy monster inside them that's actually causing them to gamify the system.
Yeah, and that brings us back to those cultural memes. What does success look like in our society? Fame, money, that's our metric for success. And that's not the same metric you see in like the Eastern religions. Mm-hmm. But for us, the Greeks really kind of put it on us that with this reductionism in science and logic, which allowed us to accelerate from where we were, but it also took us further and further away from truly understanding what it is to be human. Mm-hmm. And that was solidified when René Descartes was talking about, I think, therefore I am. And they that just started leading to more and more separation. I mean, you look at native, like Aboriginal people, their connection with the earth, all aspects of it, it's huge.
Yeah, they talk to the rocks.
Yeah. And they see everyone as their brother or sister. It's all connected to them. And that was a lot of the basis in the Eastern religions too. Mm-hmm. And, success, to be successful, the definition for them was completely different than fame and fortune. Some cultures will downplay like their hunting skills so that they're not showing off or shining among the rest of the tribe. These things were part of human life. prior to really all of this reductionism and industrial revolution.
Yeah, that, the Cartesian dualism that you're talking about. I mean, I really feel like he literally put his quote on backwards. It's like, I am, therefore I think.
Yes.
Rather than I think, therefore I am, because that created the split between mind and body, and then further split between mind, body, and spirit. And so everything is targeted individually instead of this holistic view of I am in my entirety, mind, body, and spirit. And one of the functions of my I amness, as the original divine voice answered, I am that I am, as the name of God, I am that I am. And we as a microcosm of the divine, I am that I am, therefore I think, therefore I breathe, therefore, I am of spirit. Like, it's all many things that come from that. But we really did adopt that and then start looking like, how do we isolate the mind? How do we isolate the body? How do we isolate spirit? By putting it out somewhere else outside of us. We're not participating. It's some other thing. And hopefully we do right by them, so we get some cosmic honeymoon reward system at the end of our life, And it's like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Right.
Like, here it is.
Yeah, this is paradise.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're willing to accept it. And so, you've had an intimate view of this in the medical system. And I think probably what clearly I would venture to say drew you into psychedelic medicine is that even though through the medical model by which psychedelics are becoming illegal, where it's forcing them to focus on one thing, end of life depression or complex PTSD, it's forcing them to actually look at something in the microcosm. But actually, anybody who does psychedelics know that that's not how it works. That's just one of the side effects of having these profound transcendental experiences. It's looking at the whole complexity of the individual and their relationship to their heart and to God and to spirit and their awareness. So would it be fair to say that that's one of the things that allured you to psychedelic medicines?
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, I did my first ayahuasca journey in Peru in 2012. And it was a profound experience. But I will say that after I came back without adequate integration, the experience shifted into more of, that molecule created a story in my mind that this is the way things are. And it just is a biochemical process that occurred. It was several years later that I did another journey, and it was like a spontaneous change at that point. I mean, I was an atheist scientist. Science is real, and if it can't be proven, it doesn't exist, all of that. And I had a complete reversal after one experience.
If I had to venture a guess, and so the audience knows I don't know what the answer to this is, I would say that was a bufo journey.
Actually, it wasn't.
It was
ketamine.
Put heavy money. Put heavy money on bufo for that one.
Yeah,
that provides this incontrovertible experience where you're like, "Fuck, I can't explain this anymore."
Well, that one kicked it up another notch for sure.
Yeah. So you said it was a ketamine journey, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I've obviously had unbelievably profound experiences with my experience, particularly with the blending of ketamine and cannabis, which I feel like combines the somatic awareness of the body with this kind of cosmic star nation evaporation of the boundaries of self into the universe, and it combines both. So I get it. But what was it about that particular experience for you that was like, okay, there's no turning back anymore. I can't explain this.
Yeah, there were things that I experienced that I had no reference to. And if we are truly conscious due to the wet matter in our head, that it's just an epiphenomena of the nerves, there's no way to have those ephemeral journeys and experiences that when you come out of it and there's not a word there's no words that can explain it because you have no reference point to what that experience was. And just the fact that something can be ineffable alone can really tell a scientist, shit. Maybe this isn't coming from the brain.
Yeah. That's it's interesting as you look at, this rationalist, materialist, reductionist kind of model. There's almost a level of faith that's required that's not dissimilar from the level of faith that's required to believe in God, to actually say, oh yeah, cosmos, everything, even human life, all we are, it's really, oops, how'd this happen? Like that doesn't actually hold a lot more logic when you really think about it than, no, actually there was a driving force of the cosmos that was seeking ever greater contact and ever greater, intimacy and understanding of itself. Like both are, if you want to just go from pure logic, like there's no good reason to believe that oops makes more sense, fundamentally. And I think when you get to a lot of the great thinkers like Heisenberg or Einstein, they'll talk about how you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And at the deepest levels, you find God there. Because like there's a place of ineffability, even in, quantum physics, where you start looking and you start peering deeper and deeper and deeper, and oops, no longer makes any more sense and makes less sense than actually believing in God.
Well, one of the theories of consciousness now is looking at, and this is from systems biologists, they're looking at the microtubules in the brain, and they're postulating that it's functioning like a quantum computer, which is crazy to think about. It's hard to prove, but
right. Yeah, this understanding of even the observer effect, right, starts to like I haven't listened to someone who's able to sufficiently explain from a materialist, rationalist, reductionist way, even the observer effect, which is your intention is to observe particles, you see particles, your intention is to observe waves, you see waves. Like, what? Like, how are we affecting something else? And how are particles entangled in this spooky action from a distance, as Einstein called it? Like, I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure somebody's given it their damnness to figure out. But I tend to, what filters through to me is the Greg Braden interpretation, which is like, here's God. And that certainly makes a lot more sense to me. Anyways, but to be fair, I haven't listened to the other side. But I really feel like this is a part of the new, changing, evolving story, is the return of spirit back into our lives. Like Nietzsche declared God is dead, and I think he was accurate for the way that scientific mind and everything was going. And I think there was a beneficial process to kind of overthrow the superstitions of religion, which created the witch hunts and the Inquisition and all of the horrors, and still creates horrors and, all kinds of atrocities that happen based in the name of, quote, God, which is really the superimposition of a demon in the face of God is really what that is. But I think now we're returning to a time with the psychedelic renaissance and with the return of the ancient traditional beliefs and with actually the way that science is peering into the fabric of reality, where God's coming back into culture. Like I really see that trend happening.
I do see it moving very slowly. And, just in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he talked about like the cultural attractor of when people were given a choice, they would choose the last man. And the last man was the person who chose the greatest comfort and least pain to go through life. Whereas the Übermensch was the other option that they could choose. And the Übermensch would just live on the edge, experience extreme highs, but also experience the extreme lows. And God essentially thought, why would anybody choose anything else? And yet what he was talking about in that book was that everybody chose to be last man.
Mm.
And I mean, it's a cultural attractor for us. People choose comfort.
Why?
I think there's a resistance to risk in experiencing the extremes of sadness, pain, of just loneliness, those kind of things. But we really fluctuate. However deep we go, we can equally go high.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, for me, those extreme peaks are worth every bit of those extreme lows.
No doubt. I mean, I would call it, the warrior poet ethos. It's one of the chapters of my next book, but it's the warrior is the one who has the courage to actually stand for what you believe in, stand for what matters, and the courage to choose the path of the Übermensch or Homo Amor or whatever name you have for the new emerging, human that's coming out of this. And the poet is the one who's willing to feel it all and to like thrust themselves into the depth of everything and then transmute that into art, right? Like that's where art comes from. And I think people underestimate actually also the power that we have as artists. The Toltecs would divide the world into Naguals and Tonals. The Tonals were the ordinary folks, the people choosing the last man, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The Naguals were the artists painting the masterpiece of their own life. Mm-hmm. And I think if we actually understand that we're all artists creating our own masterpiece of our life, and that any pain that you experience, it's not negating the pain, we're not bypassing the pain, but when you know that you can take that pain, like the country kind of soul singer Jelly Roll, take all the pain of his life of, crack and having his wife have to, be a prostitute to make money. And, I don't know his story super intimately, but I know like this is what comes through his music. And like, this is why he like blew up, is because he went through so much pain and so much difficulty. And then he transmutes that into art. And all of a sudden he has this just deep well. So whatever low he came from, now he can offer this. And I'm sure his songs and his story has saved thousands of people from suicide, and like when we know that our art can not only help us, but help others, then your willingness to feel what needs to be felt so that you can help somebody else through that other challenge. So whatever you're going through, however hard it is, when you know that if you share your story and when you make it through and you transform this into art, whether that's the living art of your body or a song or a poem or a story, like you can change the world with it. And so that gives you even more courage. And then, as you said, like the Kybalion, the Hermetic principles, the principle of rhythm, lows and highs and lows. We're going to experience both. And to be able to withstand the extremes and enjoy them, I mean, fuck, that's life.
Society, at least American society, right now really promotes that, boys need to be strong and they need to not show emotions. Don't show the sadness. Don't cry. As we're growing up, I can remember that was what I learned, and I became very stoic.
There's no crying in baseball.
Oh, that's right.
That's right, God damn it.
And I can remember, it was probably in my late 40s, early 50s, that I realized that I had adopted that. So I just refused to feel anything negative. It was always push it aside, get distracted, don't feel it. And I was feeling sadness one day, and I just decided to ride it as far as it would go. And it was so painful. So painful. And then I kind of hit the bottom of it, and I was almost in an awe state because I was like, wow, this is ecstasis to know that I could feel something like that. It didn't feel good at the time, but afterwards it was like an ecstatic experience. It truly was. And then after that time, I just let emotions go where they wanted to go. I would ride them to their peaks or ride them to the depths. And it was really life-changing for me.
Yeah, and the other option is if you're in that numbness. I think it's that Johnny Cash song, Hurt. The needle pokes a hole to see if I still feel. Mm-hmm. Right. And he's talking about heroin in this case. And I think there's numbness is this state that is I think the antithesis of life. Like actually the opposite of all of the good feelings is not the bad feelings. It's the numbness. Mm-hmm. The numbness stands at the opposite pole, and the elation and the deep sorrow, they're all actually more intimately connected than the numbness. Mm-hmm. So you find yourself in the numbness and you've walled off your ability to feel, which typically means you're going to have to feel the low first before you can actually naturally feel the high. You'll go to an escapist form of drug use, which is far different than the kind of entheogenic form of medicine use, which is awakening the divine within. Entheo, like within, awakening the divine within, mm-hmm. and Genesis creation. So this is kind of the dichotomy of where we're at. People want to feel. They want to feel alive. And there's two pathways. One, you allow yourself to feel, or you medicate yourself out of either into deeper comfortable numbness, like the Pink Floyd song, and a comfortable numb, or into some kind of, drug-induced mania of some variety that you can feel. And, those two options, are you going to choose which path you're going to choose? But the numbness is insufferable.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes from the way our brains have developed into this left and right hemisphere, where we've got the animate brain in the right hemisphere, and then we have the contextual brain in the left, and they should be in balance with each other, and they're not. It's the contextual brain is making a slave of the animate brain. And this is a theory of how human evolution took place, and that conceptual brain taking charge allowed for all of this growth in technology and dominance as a species on the earth. But we lost the access to the animate brain, and psychedelics have an amazing ability to kind of reestablish that default mode network of the brain. That's the self-referential, the ego. But it's patterns that are repeated so that it minimizes the cognitive processing required. So it's like a path of least resistance for people. And somebody used the analogy. It's like so the default mode network is like a riverbed with rocks in it, and the water's flowing at a constant pace. And so it creates, eddies and whirlpools in the same spot. It's just constant. And the psychedelics, it's like somebody takes the riverbed and shakes it up, and then you see what happens when the rocks settle again. And it gives you that opportunity to say, wow, maybe this is a better way to look at things. Maybe this is a better connection in the brain that makes better sense.
Yeah. For people who are of my generation at the very earliest, they probably remember the Etch-a-Sketches. And the little Etch-a-Sketch was a very simple screen, and you had two little knobs, and you could make little geometric patterns that just went up, down, left, or right. You couldn't really go at an angle. And you were just moving in right angles all the way, and you could create a little piece of art on this Etch-a-Sketch little screen. And I think it used magnets or something to pull little filaments into the screen. And then if you wanted to shake the Etch-a-Sketch, all of a sudden you'd have a blank canvas again, and you got to start over. And so it's like the default mode network are all the grooves that have been patterned by the Etch-a-Sketch of our life. And then psychedelics shake the Etch-a-Sketch. And this happens also with the release of BDNF, like brain-derived neurotropic. How you can explain this better. but BDNF gets released, which actually allows like almost fresh powder to come over your brain so that you can repattern. And this is part of the integration process. Why it's so important is you have this much more pliable state of consciousness at which you can use your little Etch-a-Sketch dials to start to carve new patterns and really fundamentally change your life. Or like Michael Pollan says, how to change your mind. You can change your mind, change the default mode network of your mind.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of psychedelics that I really resonate with, is the ability to give you the option to change things. I mean, even just not talking about psychedelics, but empathogens like MDMA. I've had conversations with Gul Dolan, who runs an MDMA lab at, I think she's at Hopkins. But she was talking to me, and this was back in 2020, in the research she hadn't published yet, but she was finding that a single dose of MDMA would reopen the critical period of social reward. We learn our social skills during this one window that they call a critical period that opens in childhood, and then it kind of closes around the teenage years, 18 or so. But we've learned all of our social skills at that point. And that window closes, and it's extremely hard to open it up again. It's pretty much locked in. And she found that one dose of MDMA reopened that window for a minimum of 48 hours, but generally for a week or two after a single dose. I mean, this persistent open area for social reward. She postulated that that's why it works so well for PTSD, but it also works well for kids on the spectrum or autistic, where they can actually learn something. And people with adverse childhood circumstances, I mean, they have learned abnormal social skills.
Yeah,
a lot of the time. And having that opportunity to reopen that window and learn new social skills is huge.
And, whatever they learn may have been adaptive to the traumatic and challenging environment that they were in. But once they're out of that environment, it's no longer adaptive. It's counterproductive. And so to be able to actually rewire all of those patterns is essential, and I think that's a big part of what's so optimistic about this, psychedelic renaissance. Unfortunately, and I want to talk more about MDMA in particular, and this dovetails into it, but unfortunately there was a very surprising ruling from the FDA towards MAPS in kind of an early analysis of their clinical data, which has been overwhelmingly positive. And it got, like an early rejection that kind of shocked me, and I think shocked a lot of people who were following this, given that they'd gotten fast track status and already like preliminary ability to serve patients in Australia and I think a couple other places. What do you think happened there? What was the ruling? What was the reason behind it? What do you think this means for the eventual legalization? Because it's not over yet. They gotta, adjust some things in the studies, but I don't understand it to the level that I think you do. So what happened there?
I've heard from both sides on this one. And I think a lot of the information is just not solid at this point. But I know there are certain people that are influential that are very much against this happening. But that's not the main reason here. When you look at the way that the studies were conducted, I mean, they really weren't well conducted studies. I mean, they were very loose. And, for something this monumental, you want really solid data. But there were inconsistencies. And, Rick Doblin, who really this has been his life's work, he got a little too cavalier, I think, with things. just a little bit too much, really sensationalizing a lot of the positive outcomes. Just he'd been better if he had just kind of kept it under wraps, rather than really take it on as a cause when they're doing the research to show this. And there's no doubt in my mind that this stuff works.
Yes.
No doubt. But the study, and I mean, he went from a nonprofit to a for-profit that was going to be conducting this. I mean, it was just, there were strange things happening there. And I mean, it was pretty unanimous among the reviewers that this is probably not the right study to confirm this on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the issues that I had heard was raised was the utilization of placebo.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a complicated issue.
It's hugely complicated.
because fundamentally, people culturally, we know what an MDMA experience is. Even if you've never had it, you don't know it exactly through gnosis, but you kind of get the idea.
You will know.
You kind of get the idea,
MDMA.
right? So you're going to know if you're in the placebo group or the control group, like whatever niacin they give you or whatever thing, it's not MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to know the difference. So it does challenge even the ability to run a double-blind study. But that's, I think, a place where we're going to have to actually loosen the model a little bit to kind of meet psychedelics somewhere so that actually the benefits can be proven, because this model of everything having to be double-blind, well, fuck, how are you going to double-blind mushrooms, or how are you going to double-blind 5-MeO DMT? Like, you're going to know if you got it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like, doc, did I get it? And like, well, actually, I don't know. Everybody knows, like everybody knows, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like there's going to have to be kind of, pressure to actually, all right, what is a model here that is acceptable to, scientifically acceptable? And then how does the scientific paradigm of the scientific model adjust to allow us to actually prove out these cases?
Well, see, this comes back to reductionism.
Yeah.
We're not looking at the right questions in this regard. And, placebo effect is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
I mean, people downplay it and they say, oh, it's just placebo effect. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Placebo effect alone turns, Cartesian dualism on its head.
Yeah.
By the very nature that the mind alone is changing conditions in the body dramatically, already we should be throwing out this reductionist model just by the innumerable proven examples of the placebo effect.
You look at research now, though, and in rat studies, they're all monoclonal. They're all the same rat, essentially. They're fed the exact same diet. They're in the exact same laboratory environment. But we try to translate that into studies with humans, and we're far from monoclonal. We're a complex organism with varying DNA, and we're contextual. I mean, you can't just look at the DNA anymore. DNA is not the central intelligence of life. I mean, DNA is an instruction book for making proteins, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the central dogma earlier, where it was this linear aspect of you go from DNA to RNA to a protein. And it's a one-way street. But now we know that's not the case. And yet we still have the central dogma that we work from. And when we do human studies, they need to be N of ones. They're contextual. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different childhood. Everybody has a different environment that they grow and play in. They have different belief systems. They have different habits, different goals. And that's one of the things that systems medicine or systems biology really looks at is take the individual and do the N of ones with the individual. and see what's working. I mean, we have enough computer models now to know when something's safe or not safe.
Right.
I mean, we can plan this out.
And that's the other thing about the MDMA studies. The safety studies were very, very solid, right? Like the safety studies on MDMA, unlike what was falsely propagandically put out, some 20 years ago, where MDMA melts holes in the brain, but actually it wasn't MDMA. It was methamphetamine that we were testing. Sorry about that. Big mistake. No retraction from the public news except on some small fucking footnote. I was like, oh, MDMA melts the brain. No, it doesn't. There's been plenty of cases of that. So then it's like, all right, how do we develop a model here where we show what we know to be true, which is that this can be a unbelievably productive element in the treatment of PTSD and a variety of other different issues, a multiplicity of them.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen MDMA work.
Me too.
And there's no doubt, and I know I can say, well, it's anecdotal, I've watched these experiences and everyone I've watched has been like incredible. But it's not like it's like, oh, half of them do well, half of them don't do well. I mean,
yeah,
and one of the other problems that occurs is by getting this as a medicalized drug, you detract from the needed experience of it. Having a sterile clinical environment where you have people sitting there with a clipboard and they're not allowed to touch you. Even if you're like,
I really need a hug.
Just hold my hand.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's not going to be as effective. I mean, we know set and setting is such a huge aspect of the effect. I mean, that's been shown scientifically.
Yeah.
And yet we still do these ketamine clinics where you go in and lay on a gurney, get an IV drip going, and the nurse just checks on you periodically. I mean, what kind of an experience can that be?
I mean, I haven't done the clinical version of ketamine therapy, though I've done a lot of clinically prescribed ketamine. But I can only imagine the nurse coming in the depth of a journey. How are you doing? You're like, what? What dimension is this in, and where are you coming from? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm in the 11th. Like, I don't know where you are. Like, it's fundamentally an interesting thing. And I do hear from people who've gone that route, and that's all it is. They show up, they get injected, they leave, they're in a bright white place. Maybe they get a blindfold if usually they're onto that, at least, to give people a blindfold, and some random ass music, not the best music, but whatever random ass kind of somewhat relaxing music, fucking spa channel on Sirius XM or whatever the fuck they play. And it's like, and they're like, man, it was scary as shit. I was like, of course it was.
Yeah.
Of course it was, so.
The guy that I think first developed ketamine, he was up in Boston somewhere, but they still have a lab up there that they do ketamine work all the time. But they have these rows of gurneys that are divided by curtains, and they have like one nurse that walks down the row. I mean, you have people screaming in one area and people hallucinating and talking about their hallucinations out loud. I mean, what kind of an experience can that be?
No, it's like Strassman's, study of DMT, where they had an anal probe that was checking like body temperature, and then everybody had visions of aliens that were trying to probe them, and we have this whole cultural meme about anal probing aliens that probably came from this study, which is like you're on a wildly psychedelic trip and you have something in your ass, so of course you're going to think aliens are sodomizing you. It's very interesting as science and these ancient and beautiful, or even modern, some of these medicines are more modern, but these wildly transformative, transcendent experiences are trying to be measured under this other model. It's like the model has to meet the medicine for this to actually be understood. And I think all of the ancient medicine traditions understood that. Nobody serves somebody ayahuasca in a gurney And it's just like, how did you do? Good luck. Oh, well, it looks like this patient experienced nausea. Let's give him like an anti-nausea, like, no, it's like fucking part of it. Here's your purge bucket. Here's the ceremony, It seems like, from that understanding, it's decriminalization, like they've done in Portugal and other places like that, is probably a pretty essential kind of next move. And then medical has to kind of adjust and allow this process to happen.
I just was recently in Lisbon, and I mean, I didn't see any like homeless people out hanging or drug users in the parks or anything like that. And yet, here in Austin,
yeah,
go down there just off of Cesar Chavez, and I mean, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, and Austin's nowhere near what, like, the Tenderloin in San Francisco is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that need to shift, and also I think people assume that, oh, decriminalize, there's going to be so many more people doing drugs and it's going to be a fucking mess. But then you actually look at the example. Okay, well, let's look at the place where it happened. How's it going? And they're like, yeah, it's going super good. And we're just imagining that these things that we're doing for public health are going to be for public health, but they're not. And you can just look at the data. I mean, I think a lot of people had those beliefs about cannabis. Like, oh, so many people are going to be out, so many more car crashes and so many more things. Like, and then Colorado was like, yeah, fuck hell. We're going to do it. And then we're going to release all the data. And actually everything was more chill, like a few people, freaking out and eating too many cookies and thinking they're going to die, but they didn't.
And it's funny because it was kids.
Yeah.
The latest report I saw was that like calls to 911 went up like 100% for people ingesting mushrooms, but they were like kids 14 to 16 were calling in.
Freaked out.
Yeah. And that's just poor choices.
For sure. I mean, and that's also having to hide it, having to be in this thing where you just get it. You don't know anything about it. You don't know which strain it is. Well, I took 2 grams of mushrooms one time and it was a great time. Well, then you get 2 grams of penis envy and all of a sudden you're on a white knuckle sleigh ride through the cosmos and you're like, what the fuck just happened? But we don't have that kind of knowledge, and the elders that are disseminating that knowledge and having the conversations with their children that are like, all right, kids, let's let dad and grandpa and the uncles tell you about, give you the lay of the land here so that you understand what you're doing, and also know that you get into a tough spot, like, give me a call, and people have known me as a psychonaut of 25 years. So it doesn't happen as often now, but there was a period for a while where I would get used to those calls where somebody would be, they would take some medicine of some sort. Maybe it was LSD or maybe it was, psilocybin, and I'd get a call and they'd be telling me all of these reasons. Sorry, they're so paranoid. And I just calmly, I just had almost kind of like a routine answer. I would be like, haha, well, I have to tell you, you're experiencing what I call the normal. Like, this is the usual, like the usual freak out is like, people are listening to me. I don't know, this is never going to end. Like, no, it's okay. Nobody's listening to you. You're all right. Put on some music. I'll send them some tracks. Be like, this is normal. This will be over soon. You'll be in your kitchen eating snacks in 3 hours. like it's going to be okay. And just having those voices around is enormously helpful.
Yeah. And the experiences, even the most ecstatic experiences, it's not like you go, wow, I'm going to do that again tomorrow.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. The experiences, people want to integrate them. They want to really sit with them. But you just don't see people taking LSD one day and going, hey, let's do twice as much tomorrow, or do it 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, oh yeah, that was a great experience. or was not such a great experience, but most of them are great depending on the mindset going in.
Mm-hmm.
But mushrooms the same way. And you look at lethal doses of these things. I mean, we don't really know what a lethal dose of mushrooms would be.
Yeah.
I know LSD, that one party somewhere that somebody spiked the punch and measured incorrectly and gave 100 times the normal amount.
Oh,
and
God.
people were hospitalized from that, but nobody died. And in fact, the people that were hospitalized, some of them said it was the most profound, life-changing experience of their lives.
Yeah, that makes me sweat thinking about 100 times more LSD than a normal amount. But yeah, I mean, that's and then contrast that with, I don't know, I mean, I think the statistics I read on Tylenol overdose, just Tylenol overdose is like, there's like 900 deaths a year or something crazy from liver failure, because of Tylenol overdose. And that's like, everybody takes Tylenol. There's infant Tylenol and children's Tylenol and, but there was like, whatever, that's just par for the course. And same with so many of these other, allopathic psychiatric medications. It's like suicidality. I was just watching some commercial, because we have commercials for all of these fucking things. I didn't even know what they were trying to treat. Might have been hair loss. I don't even know exactly what it was, but some people with nice sets of hair were having fun. And it's like, side effects may include suicidality and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, suicidality is a side effect? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, there's just, it's a wild world where this certain class of things is acceptable, whatever the side effects might be. It's like, and this other thing, all right, yeah. It's a path that has its own pitfalls. You can get into a manic state. You can get into, a confused state. You can get really scared and be kind of traumatized by how scared you are. It's not like there's not bad things that can happen, but it's not the same. It's like, it's not the same, but we're so hyper-focused on this negative that's coming from this one pot, and then just being like, yeah, all right, like whatever is happening over here in this approved, it's almost like the religion of the doctors in the white lab coats. It's like, whatever they say is good, but these people over here with the necklaces like I'm wearing, don't trust them. They're out to kill.
No necklace here.
Yeah, exactly. You're a proper doctor. Proper, no power amulets. Yeah. So this is definitely one of the threads in this story that's currently actively being rewritten, but it's certainly not the only thread. I mean, I think understanding the power of our sexual vitality and actually how to utilize that energy source in a world that's been overly pornographied and commodified sexually, that's another deep pathway. And I know that's a pathway that, you're also interested in exploring as well. Is like, how do we harness this sexual energy, this vital life force energy, for our own healing, expansion, ecstasis, growth as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the areas of medicine that is really messed up right now too, because any of these things that can help with that, you have to have basically a symptom of something for it to be available.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't have a symptom of not enough happiness or marital discord is not going to get you approved for MDMA. And yet prior to it being banned, it was used by counselors in over 500,000 therapy sessions. And the success rate with marital counseling was outrageously high with that group. And yet now it doesn't have any indication of it being beneficial in any way, is how they have it classified as a Schedule 1.
Yeah. This is again where you have to classify something as a disease state in order for you to actually consider it treatable. But it's missing out on this whole huge spectrum of what is human thriving, what is a life worth living, what is a life worth protecting, what is a world worth saving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all connected. If you're not able to harvest the joy from life, why do you care if the environment gets destroyed? Because the world is a place of hell anyways. So fuck it, let it burn. Let it burn. But if it's a life that you love, then that's worth something protecting for yourself and all of the future generations that'll come after you. So that's the key. So when you look at this, because you've had children and you've been in this own process itself, like what are the ways that you start to understand like sexuality in right relation with human thriving and what is possible?
Well, sexuality is a vital part of life. In my opinion, it is part of that life of excellence. Sexuality it seems to be a biologic driver, an imperative. And you talk about connections and just creating a connection with another person. I mean, sexuality is one of the strongest areas that can occur with that. It's like natural MDMA that occurs, but you have to be open to it being that and understand it as that. I mean, if you're told, like boys, they're like, you want to hold off until she has an orgasm and then you're good to go. And so all you think about when you start having sex is that thing. Mm. And you're not making love. You're not in that state of just enjoying that experience and feeling into everything. I mean, you're just sitting there going, okay, I can hold off. We've marginalized sexuality so significantly in our society, in most societies. I mean, it wasn't like that long ago. It was just, now it's just taboo. And I mean, even things like fetishes. I mean, fetishes are just actually some variation of sexual preference, but we've made it a disease. I was interviewing someone on this not too long ago, and that marginalization of those sexual fetishes that people have is, if it's not harmful to another person,
fully consensual,
I mean, why is it a fetish?
Good question. Good question. And I think this goes to certain puritanical ideals and certain stories that are being told. And even if you don't understand it, okay, like you don't have to understand it as long as it's abiding by the bounds, right? Like, I think some people want to say, oh, well, the desire to sleep with children is just my fetish. Well, nope, sorry.
Right.
Here's a hard fucking gleaming wall of swords that are on fire boundary. This is off fucking limits, or any kind of non-consensual activity. Now, but then you take something like, it just gets me off when I see someone's feet, or it gets me off when they swaddle me like a baby. Okay, fucking have at it. Have at it. If you want a pacifier and you want to replace it with some girl's toes, go for it. Have a ball. You know what I mean?
But in our society, those are classified as psychiatric disorders.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that I think ultimately it's interesting, because there was this big push to actually undo some of the different dogma of the traditional religions, a lot of which had to do with sexuality, right? It was like, this doesn't make sense. That we're all sinners because we all have to have sex. Well, this is what creates life in the first place. So I don't understand how that we'd be set up for failure from the start. I mean, what kind of dickhead God would that be?
Yeah.
So, all right, that doesn't make sense. But then we've taken it we've still like taken some of these puritanical ideals and then applied them to these applied those superstitious puritanical ideals, which we've discarded the whole God part of it and just kept the superstition, and then applied it to this medical system and then tried to marginalize all of this. It's very strange. It's a very strange world that we've got ourselves into. And it's, again, one of those other things that needs to be rewound and re-understood. And you look at the clinical data and survey data from people who are in kink communities in particular, power exchange, submission, dominance communities, and their overall, mental stability, well-being. There's all kinds of metrics, and I listed a bunch of them in my book, Own the Day. All kinds of metrics that show that they're actually more well-adjusted, citizens of society, because they're able to access and work with and deal with these forces that are inside that now have a safe, productive outlet for us to actually explore.
I don't think people allow themselves to enjoy life much anymore.
Last man mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all got to shift. All right. So a couple rapid fire questions here for you. What do you think of methylene blue?
The scientific evidence is vague on it. I get an IV periodically, and I measure things like with the wearables and see improvements in metrics when I do it.
Mm-hmm. When you do methylene blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the impact on mitochondria is real.
Mm-hmm.
So
lukewarm, but worth. And you
I can't say anything definitive about it.
Yeah, but you don't see any safety risks or anything with that, other than your mouth looking like you just
that's
performed oral on a Smurf.
That's why I go with the IV.
Yeah. What about this kind of peptide revolution that's been happening? And I know there's been some kind of reclassification of peptides. It's been a little more difficult. There's this kind of Wild West peptides moment here that's kind of contracted a little bit. But what do you think of the peptides?
Yeah, I love peptides. Mm-hmm. We've been using peptides in our clinical practice since 2016, 2015. And we had a real heyday there for a while until the government decided to shut down the compounding pharmacies for the most popular ones that were the most effective ones. Mm-hmm. And they said there's just not enough clinical evidence of its benefit. They didn't have a lot of negative reporting from them. And these were prescribed a lot around the United States.
Yeah.
But I saw amazing impacts from the peptides. You talk about, it's just a protein that is similar to what the body makes. Some of them are identical to what the body makes. And you just give a little higher dose than what's typically done, and it optimizes certain functions. But it's very laser focused in most cases, as opposed to most medications, which have on-target and off-target effects. Peptides are generally on target.
Yeah. All right. Stem cells.
Stem cells, I waffle on that too. Mm-hmm. I think there's certain areas where stem cells are beneficial.
Like localized stem cells, for like recovery of
localized injuries, joints, those kind of things. There's a lot of people doing the IV stem cells. There's a little bit of risk involved in that, graft versus host reactions. What I'm excited about is the possibility of using these things called mitelets, which are you get them from platelets, but they're mitochondria from the packets from the platelets, like little exosomes from the platelets when the platelets degrade. But the possibility of taking young PRP fractions and culturing it with like your own stem cells to get, and what happens is the mitochondria become youthful in that. And so imagine, drawing off your stem cells, which are still aged a little bit.
Yeah.
And giving them brand new mitochondria, youthful mitochondria, That's one of the areas I'm really excited about.
When do you think that might become a process that we could engage in? Is it happening now?
Well, it could happen now. I mean, you would just get the PRP from young donors and
that's platelet-rich plasma?
Right. Yeah, and there's a certain fraction that's going to have most of those platelets in it. And then, when you're culturing, you draw off cells from the fat or the bone marrow and you culture those to grow the stem cells. You bathe them in this solution of mitelets. And there's a company that's working on extracting mitelets as an isolated piece. And hopefully that will manifest very quickly.
I mean, the promise of, or the possibility, I should say, of useful mitochondria going back in your body. I mean, you see kids just running around with endless fucking energy and joy, this exuberance. Like, fuck, I'll take some of that.
Yeah.
Why not?
Mitochondrial deterioration as we age is one of the biggest impactors on development of disease.
Yeah. And I'm imagining you're, a strong proponent of the hot-cold therapy kind of movement to help support that?
It depends.
Okay.
Now we're learning that there's a new test that we have. It's an early access test that the FDA approved for people in the study, but it's called Sapir-X. And it is a test that looks at the senescence of the immune system as well as the resilience of the immune system.
What's senescence mean?
Senescence means that these cells are burned out. They're essentially, they're still alive, but they're just taking up resources and secreting toxins in the system. That's a senescent cell because the body is just not well equipped as we get older to get rid of them as well. So you can look at the balance of the senescent cells and the resilience of the immune cells. And depending on how those combine, and the relative numbers of each, you can tell whether somebody should avoid significant stressing of the body, like in fasting, cold plunge, any of that stuff.
Like whether they're ready for that level of hormesis?
Right, because if they don't have the resilience in the immune system, they could kick themselves over into a cancer-forming state, a state where the immune system just gets severely compromised because of the stressor. I mean, typically those are eustressors. They're good stressors for the body.
Sure.
But now we're finding that there's some people that shouldn't be taking rapamycin, which is a common drug used in the longevity industry. But you can use this test to really gauge whether that's beneficial or not.
Mm-hmm. So, but that would generally apply not specifically necessarily to hot and cold, but more to the general category of when the body has the resilience to be able to withstand hormesis. So it would apply to heavy workouts. It would apply to a variety of different things.
Anything that stresses the body, even if it's a eustressor, a good stress.
Right. All right. So then let's say somebody is taking MDMA both medicinally or recreationally. What would you recommend for them to help kind of restore, recover, and support the brain body after MDMA usage, or during, or before?
Eat, drink, and sleep. Good night's sleep before, good night's sleep afterwards. Eat during the period you're on it. Drink during the period you're on it, but don't overdrink. Don't add other substances to it, alcohol especially. That's just a recipe for the worst hangover you can ever have. I don't supplement around it though. Most of the studies that have come out in the last 3 years, and there's been at least 3 of them that looked at this neurotransmitter depletion, and they're finding that those things I mentioned are really what's creating that Tuesday blues day or whatever you want to call it. But it's not necessarily the neurotransmitter depletions. And in fact, some of the people taking like 5-HTP, they can actually induce those kind of symptoms in themselves by taking that. One thing I'm excited about, there's been some recent articles on using BPC 157, a peptide, in and around the use of MDMA. And they're saying that it decreases any of the mild toxicity that occurs from it, and the downregulation of the serotonin receptors that occurs over time. Taking the BPC, according to the biochemical theory of the way the BPC works in the brain, it works on the nitric oxide and L-NAME system, it seems to be beneficial. And I know people that have taken the BPC before taking MDMA, and they had no symptoms afterwards.
Interesting. Now, BPC is often associated with gut health as well. And there's a lot of serotonin produced in the gut. And obviously, if you're taking MDMA orally, it's interacting through the gut. And so that makes some I don't know if there is actually a correlation that would have any scientific reason that those two things might be associated in any way.
Well, BPC 157 will increase angiogenesis in the gut lining, so growth of blood vessels. So you get better flow there. So theoretically, it could increase the production of serotonin. I haven't seen a study on it, but that'd be interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's interesting. As the psychonaut that I am, I've experienced a significant difference in injectable MDMA versus oral MDMA, and found that these, hangover blues that you can get from orally ingested MDMA are significantly reduced from injectable MDMA because, and presumably in my mind, it was because it bypassed the gut. But what in your mind, from a kind of scientific perspective, would explain that kind of difference in the ability to kind of rebound and tolerate it? First of all, the experience is magnificent. Obviously,
it's probably pretty quick too.
Yeah, very, very fast. Yeah. You're talking, 5 minutes. You're like, oh boy, here we go. And it seems to be a little bit more stable once you get to that place. What do you think is the mechanism of ingestion, being one intramuscular versus oral? How is that affecting how this compound is actually used in the body?
Yeah, it would make sense though, because anything taken in orally is going to first pass through the liver. And the liver is the primary area for MDMA to be converted to MDA. So you're going to get a large surge of MDA. So theoretically, you should be able to have less of that sympathetic kick that when it comes on, with the jaw clenching and
for sure,
the heat and all of that. It seems like it would mitigate that.
Man, it's so interesting looking at what the possibilities are if you start to take the lid off of all of these different things, and then also which compounds can work well together and which ones do not work well together. Like which things are helpful and which things are radically unhelpful, and you can either go my way, which is figure it out and sometimes fuck up, but do so responsibly, in a way that's like ease in, dip your toes in, start to understand, see the interactions. But there's a whole kind of frontier of what it looks like when you intelligently start to combine. And I think we have understood this with like MDMA and psilocybin. That was my first psychonautic journey when I was 18. Wildly synergistic, that combination, right? And then there's other things. It's like cannabis and psilocybin. In my experience and the experience of other people that I've seen is like, got to be a little careful. Like those two don't necessarily work well together. It can exacerbate these feelings of kind of paranoia and this sense of I'm in the freak out. I'm in the normal freak out mode. So it's interesting looking at that, and for, we're not recommending anybody go out exploring all of these things. This is, I don't recommend that anybody do anything, period, other than breath work and meditation. And I do recommend people, get in a float tank and do these things that you can manage. And if you run into any trouble, you slow down your breathing or you get out the fucking tank and you'll be all right, Yeah. But fundamentally, there's a whole frontier of looking at, all right, how do we create these really revolutionary optimal conditions with sound and with light and with touch and with, different compounds working together. It's a pretty exciting world that we're entering, but a world that needs to be entered with maximum caution, some general rules, minimum effective dose kind of mentalities, and also radical adherence to set and setting. You know, if you're going to push the dose of anything, if you're going to mix anything, talk to somebody who's been there, done that. Have a sitter, if not a shaman, someone who you can reach out to and say, like, you know, are people watching me? Or my phone's tapped? And it's like there's some of the barbarians at the gate, and they're like, no, it's cool. You're still in your bedroom. Like, it's all good. The aliens aren't here. You know, like that's a very helpful
Sitters
person.
are very helpful.
It's a very helpful person to have in this process. What else? I mean, you're really on the cutting edge of, you know, these new compounds, new things, not even psychedelic, but just for human health and thriving. What's like kind of lighting you up now as you look at the field?
All of it. I mean, this stuff that's out there, especially in the longevity space and age rejuvenation, we are in an exponential growth phase. I mean, there's a company that's got this solution of messenger RNA that they can microneedle into the skin, and it will rejuvenate the skin in both structure and function. The cells become youthful cells again. I mean, up to 30 years younger is what they're predicting.
Wow.
And then it's out of the system. It's just microneedled in, and you're done. It epigenetically resets the fibroblasts in the skin. There is a new injection that's getting ready to go into clinical trials that will regrow missing teeth.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Full adult teeth from an injection. I mean,
and no risk of vagina dentata or
no.
You know,
I mean, they had no complication. That's why they got approved for human trials now. There were no complications in the animal studies.
Just so I'm clear, is vagina dentata a real condition? Does that actually happen, or is that a made up thing?
I couldn't tell you.
That vagina dentata is when the pussy grows teeth. Is that real or not? I don't know. Can someone look that up? Is that a real phenomenon?
Check ChatGPT.
Is this a ghost story that we've been told?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it probably came from the idea of a teratoma, because some ovaries can grow teratomas, which tumors with teeth and hair and
ooh, that's gnarly.
Yeah, they're really gross.
Wow, that's terrifying.
Although they are also kind of cool. I mean, like,
also the other way to look at it. You got ovaries with teeth. That's a bad bitch. It's a folktale. It's a folktale.
No, it's real.
No,
I've taken them out.
Vagina dentata is real, but the ovaries with teeth.
The ovaries are real.
The ovaries are real. The vagina with teeth is just a folktale. So don't worry, everybody. If you're scared of vaginas, it's okay. You can just be gay.
You
don't need to pretend. You don't need to pretend that they have teeth. They're not going to eat you. You know. Oh man. Well, it's such a pleasure to know you and to call you a friend and a brother, and to know you're always there whenever I have something in my personal life or anything going on. You know, in my relationship or with my health, or like we just talked about at the beginning, you know, going on this fertility journey with you is, it's just, I feel very blessed to have you as a friend and brother, and the world is very blessed to have your mind and to have your heart and to have you here to serve the betterment of all.
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, 100%.
In gratitude.
And anything else you want to share about Apeiron, or anything else that you're working on, or any place where people can follow you?
The most exciting thing right now is we're opening a telewellness program. It's going to be a really more affordable option of getting access to the information on the cutting edge treatments, on the assessments. You know, really doing a deep dive into your human system with in-depth labs and metabolomics, all of that. But that's going to be a telewellness program. So we're able to reach out all over the U.S. with it. It's launching next month.
Great. So where can people go to start to find access to that?
The company is called Clotho Wellness, Klotho, which is Clotho was the weaver of the thread of life. And Clotho is the name of the gene that everybody's targeting for longevity. 15% of people carry a variation of it that gives them greater longevity and greater intelligence. But they're also finding that if you can get it to release on an ongoing basis, and I'm working with a company that's creating these plasmids that the next thing we're doing is the Clotho. And so I'm excited about that possibility.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We love you. And we'll see you when we see you. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus Podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.